Hi everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Tarot to the Nines, although today we're not actually going to be talking about tarot. Well, we are a little bit, but mainly we're going to be talking about, as you can tell from the diagram on the board behind me, the Enneagram. And I mentioned the Enneagram in my very first video in this series and said I'd be coming back to it, so I thought now would be a good time for us to have a quick look at 3 of the types on the Enneagram. So if you're waiting for the number 5 in Tarot to the Nines, this is not the 5 video. So I'm sorry number 5, if you are part of the constellation of the Hierophant, you've just got to wait a little bit longer, but I promise it's coming soon. Now, I'm also sorry it's taken me so long to get this video done. I have had a little bit of a break because just things were busy at work and so on, and then I wasn't very well. I had a kind of bug which knocked me out for about 3 or 4 days, and then I was just really tired afterwards. So now I'm back to full strength, I hope anyway, full strength, and yeah, ready to come back with another video. So probably it would be a good idea if I just recapped very briefly on the Enneagram as a whole, and then we can say something about the specific types that I'm looking at. And you'll see from the title of this video that we're actually looking at what's called the Heart Triad, which is types 2, 3 and 4, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. So first of all, let's just talk about the Enneagram. So I gave a bit of an introduction to all 9 types in the first video, but I want to say a little bit more actually about the symbol of the Enneagram in this video, and also about the numbers, because of course this video in relation to tarot, this video series in relation to tarot has been all about tarot and numbers, and I've made the point several times that the reason I wanted to do a series on tarot and number is that number, as well as having literal meaning, also has symbolic meaning, and that's certainly true in the Enneagram, as you're about to see. So the first thing to say is that the name Enneagram relates to this overall symbol. Imagine the words are not there, it's just a circle and those lines and the numbers. That's the, well, in fact, without the numbers, that's the Enneagram symbol. And just very simply, it's a Greek word, and the very simple way of looking at it is Ennea means 9, and gram means like a diagram, like a picture. So this is a pictorial representation of 9 points. So it's a 9-pointed symbol. That is what the Enneagram literally means. And the way that the Enneagram system works is in terms of the Enneagram of personality, which is what we're talking about here. And there's a big detailed history of how the Enneagram of personality came to be, and I'll link some resources below so you can explore that. It's beyond the scope of this video series to go into the detail of that. But the symbol itself is very, very old, and nobody really knows where it came from. And it has turned up in a number of mystical traditions. It's most closely associated with 𝙍𝙀𝙎𝙊, although he didn't use it in quite the way that we're describing here. And Enneagram purists, and you will find some of them online, reviewing Enneagram books and so on, will say that the Enneagram of personality is a load of rubbish, and 𝙍𝙬𝙎 did something different, and that's the only true Enneagram. Well, I feel about that the same way I feel about people who say that there's only one type of tarot and you can only read it in one particular way. Rubbish to both of those things. The truth of the matter is these are flexible symbolic systems. Meaning can come from a number of different directions, and there's great richness in the Enneagram of personality. So with that said, let me just say a little bit about how this symbol, the overall symbol, is composed. And to make things a bit easier, I've split it up into 3, let me just move the camera so I don't disappear from view, 3 different symbols. The circle, you're familiar with circles I'm sure, the triangle, and this funny looking thing here, which is kind of like a star that's being stamped on and stretched. And these each represent different numerical groupings. So as we saw in the video for the number, well, for the non-number 0, this symbol, which often is used to represent 0, this circle, can also represent totality, oneness, indivisible wholes, the existence of everything before it's split up into duality and into different parts and so on. So that represents the law of 1. We all know about 1. We know that in in a spiritual sense, we can talk about oneness with each other, oneness with God, the idea that everything is connected. There's the Tao, the idea that we are all part of an interconnected whole, and that part of a spiritual journey, or part of the purpose of the spiritual journey, is to put us back in touch with that oneness, which we have lost the awareness of. And also, if you look at it from a scientific point of view, if you want to think in terms of the Big Bang, the idea that there was at some point one single point of matter that exploded out into everything that is, including you and me, and everything that we see around us, we understand that oneness works in the literal sense as well as in the kind of metaphysical sense. So the law of one relates to the idea that the 9 points on the Enneagram, each of which represents different points of view, different human points of view, indicates that actually if you take all of those different points of view together and put them together and coalesce them, then you have got a unified whole. And in fact, one of the most interesting but quite advanced Enneagram books is called Facets of Unity by 𝙍𝙬𝙊𝙍𝙍. It's not one that I'd recommend for beginners, but if you know a bit about the Enneagram and you're interested in the kind of stuff we're talking about in this series, then it's a great book. And he calls the Enneagram, or the points on the Enneagram, facets of unity. So, you know, they are different parts of this overall jewel-like whole. And I've described tarot in the same way, as you may recall. So there's the idea of the law of one, wholeness, unity. Then we have the law of three, and that's represented by the triangle in the middle there. And the interesting thing about the law of three is that if you take 1 and divide it by 3, you get that rather interesting decimal 0.333333. So threeness contains itself, and you'll see that each of the points on the 3 on the triangle are divisible by 3. So we've got 3 itself, we've got 6, which is 2 3s, and we've got 9, which is 3 3s. And then we have the law of 7, and you might think, well, where's the law of 7 coming from? Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there are 6 points, Brian, on that weird squashed star-like thing. Well, there are, unless, now follow me here, unless you trace the symbol, we'll do it on this one because it's bigger, unless you go from 1 to 4 to 2 to 8 to 5 to 7 and then back to 1, that's 7 points. So look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there are 7 staging posts as you trace this symbol. And here is a rather interesting thing. If you have a calculator to hand, grab it and take your calculator and into it type the following: 1 divided by 7. And what you'll find is you get a decimal, and that decimal will be 0.142857 etc, etc, etc. So when 1 is divided by 7, you'll find that that's the decimal you get. So these numbers have a very close relationship, not just to the points on the Enneagram that relate to this funny 7 representative squiggle, but actually mathematically they represent 7-ness. Now we've talked about 1 in this series so far, and we've talked about 3, so you can go back and look at those things. 7, like 5, is yet to come. We'll get there. The other thing I want to say to you is I mentioned that each of the points on the Enneagram represents different, I don't want to say personality types because it's not quite as simple as that, but represents different, whoa, we're wobbling all over, sorry about that, represents different perspectives. So imagine you have this idea of unity. Unity splits off into 9, and we have 9 different perspectives on the world, and we each have a favoured perspective. The truth of the matter is, each one of us, is all of this. So you'll hear about people saying, oh, I'm an Enneagram 9, or I'm an Enneagram 5. And the reason for that is that when you place yourself on the Enneagram, and it's not a simple thing to do, it's quite a complex process, and it takes time and self-reflection, and sometimes reflection from others to be able to do it effectively. It's not a quick do a test and that gives you your number, usually. You might come out as a number, or you might determine that you're a number, but you are all of these at different times and to different degrees. But you will have one of the numbers that is your favoured home base, and that relates to your type. So each of the numbers is a type. and they have different names depending on which Enneagram school you're talking about or which teacher you're relating to. But just briefly, number 1 is sometimes called the reformer or the perfectionist, and I'm not going to say much about these because the clue is kind of in the name. Number 2 is called the helper or the giver. Number 3 is the achiever or the performer. Number 4 is the individualist or the romantic, sometimes called the artist. Number 5 is the investigator or the observer. Number 6 is the loyalist or the questioner, sometimes called the skeptical loyalist, which kind of combines those. Number 7 is the enthusiast or the epicure, sometimes called the specialist. Number 8 is the challenger, the boss, leader sometimes. And then number 9 is the peacemaker, the mediator. So those are the types. Each type has what's called a subtype, and the subtype makes it sound as though it's some kind of secondary type, but it's not really. What the subtype relates to is the way that you primarily embody the energy that you have and express it in the world. And the 3 types are either self-preservation, sexual, or social. Self-preservation is obviously very kind of inwardly, individually focused. Sexual sounds more exciting than it is. It really just means that you relate better and more often on a one-to-one basis. And then the social is that you represent more in kind of group sense. So that's your subtype, and I'm not going to go into that in great detail here. It's just worth being aware of it, because it helps you understand why there is some complexity in this system. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, I'm a 1 and that's that. It's a case of there are other factors as well. So that's the subtypes. The other factor is that each of the types has got wings, 2 wings in fact, and the wings are the numbers on either side of it. So if you're a 9, you will have a 1 wing and an 8 wing. So the 9s have an element, the peacemakers and mediators have an element of the reformer and perfectionist in them, and also of the challenger and the boss. And one of the wings usually is considerably more developed than the other. So we talk about somebody being a 9-wing 1, or a 9-wing 8, or a 5-wing 4, or a 5-wing 6, or a 6-wing 7, or a 6-wing 5. So that's the wings, and that just colours your personality, skews it in a particular direction, so that you can have several 9s in a room together, but because they have different wings and different subtypes, they will have, although they have some broad commonality in terms of how they look at the world, they will also have some differences in terms of those nuances. So that's the wings. And then finally there's the lines, and the lines are represented by these symbols like the triangle or the funny squashed star thing. And what they relate to is the fact that each of the types has got a relationship with other types depending on whether they are in a state of security or a state of stress. And what happens is, if they're in a state of security, they can embody the more positive aspects of the types that they're connected to, and if they're in stress, then they are likely or at risk of embodying the more negative aspects. So number 5, for example, is connected to an 8 and a 7, because you can see there are 2 lines connecting it. Number 6 is connected to the 9 and the 3. Number 1 is connected to the 4 and the 7, and so on. And there are specific ways that they're connected and directions of travel, but again, a bit beyond the scope of this video. I just want this to be a bit of an introduction. So that is an overview, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean the board, and we are going to put some more information up about the triads. And actually I should, just before I do that, say that there are 3 triads. Today we're going to speak about the Heart Triad, number 2, 3 and 4. And the reason I'm starting at number 2 is that the triads, oh, this is going to be exciting, I'm about to obliterate this lovely diagram. The triads are actually split like this. Let me get this right. So we have 2, 3 and 4, the Heart Triad, and the Heart Triad are the types that relate to the world mainly through their heart, through their emotions. We have the Thinking Triad, the Head Triad, 5, 6 and 7, which tends to relate to the world through thought. That's the first reaction in a situation, to think about it. And then we have what we call the Feeling Triad, or the Body Triad, which is 8, 9 and 1, and that relates to the world from instinct, gut instinct, sometimes called the Gut Triad or the Instinctual Triad. And so I've symbolized these, as you can probably see, with the love hearts for the Heart Triad, the thinking clouds for the Thinking Triad, and the sparky instinctual energy for the instinctual triad. And what I'm going to do with these Enneagram videos is I'm going to take each of the triads in turn and talk about the types in that triad. And so today we are talking about the Heart Triad, and that's coming up, as if by magic, now. So here we are with the number 2, the helper stroke giver. And what I'm going to do for each of those is talk to you a bit about the type in terms of its qualities. I'm also going to talk to you about what it can be like when it's at its best and when it's at its worst. So when somebody is in a healthy state and an unhealthy state. I'm going to talk to you about how the type changes, or what type it moves towards when it's in stress and when it's in security. And then for each of these we'll talk a bit about what you can do to be the healthiest type of this sort. Now this is very much an overview, and there's a great deal of depth that I'm not including here because there just is not time in a video series of this nature. But yeah, we'll see where we get to with this. So number 2, as I've said, is the helper and the giver, and like all of the heart-centered types, it's very much based on the emotional side of things, and it relates to the world in an emotional way. Number 2s are, as you would tell by the name, are active, helpful, optimistic, empathic. They're very other focused, so they want to be able to demonstrate their helpfulness to others. That is a prime motivator. And part of the Enneagram theory, and again it's too much to go into in detail here, is that because each of the types represents a different way of looking at the world, once unity has been left, once we've split off into all these separate forms, each of the type has a wound, a kind of primal separation wound that it is trying to cover up by the way that it behaves and the way that it acts. So it's trying to cover over the pain of this separation from unity by behaving in a certain way that is almost like a replacement for unity. It's not unity itself, but it's a replacement for it. And in the number 2's case, the idea of demonstrating helpfulness to others is how a 2 gets validation and feels complete. Although of course being focused outward away from our internal connection can never make us feel complete. So there are inherent difficulties there, and that's part of what the Enneagram work is about being aware of these things so that we can start finding our way back to ourselves, to what makes us both unique but also connected to everything else that is. Anyway, that's a bit of a divergence. So yeah, active, helpful, optimistic, empathic. When it's at its best, number 2 is very loving, very supportive, very helpful, as you'd expect from the name. When it's at its worst, it can become hysterical and manipulative because it becomes worried that it's not being validated for helping others. In stress, it moves towards number 8, which is the sometimes called the boss, and in fact that can actually manifest itself as bossiness in a number 2. And in security, it can move more towards that kind of emotionally centered, deep, romantic number 4. Now, in terms of what to do if you're a 2, and in order to be the healthiest 2 you can be, remember you're going to be very outwardly focused. So part of what you can do is take time alone to reflect inwardly, get reconnected with yourself, with your own center. Find meaning in what you do. It's important that you find meaning in your own work rather than always trying to find meaning externally in others. And going alongside that, recognize your own achievements. Don't just rely on the achievements of others to give you, or their understanding of your achievements to give you validation. Recognize your own achievements and really get in touch with your own ability to give yourself praise when needed. And finally, ask. If you need help, ask. A number 2 is fixated on helping other people, but we all need help ourselves. So in order to be a healthy 2 and be able to do the best you can for other people, you've got to be able to know when you need help and to ask for it as well. So that is number 2. Okay, and now we're at number 3, the achiever stroke performer. The qualities of the number 3: hard-working, competitive, success-oriented. That's what the achiever is about. They value success, they value status. Flexible, and flexible in the sense of being able to adapt to different circumstances in order to achieve. But the shadow side of that is that they can also be changeable in the sense that they will change themselves in order to present the right kind of facade to the world in order to achieve the status that they're seeking. So when they are in a healthy place, in fact, I should have done this in purple, and that should have a little plus, so forgive me, that is a plus rather than a minus. When they're in a healthy, aware state, they are socially conscious and connected. When they're unaware, when they're unhealthy, they can be contemptuous and domineering. At stress, they can move towards 9, which can lead them to be, that's the mediator, peacemaker. And you'll notice that in stress, it doesn't necessarily mean that you move to a bad quality, and in security, it doesn't necessarily mean you move to a good quality. It just means you move to a different type, and it will depend on yourself and your status of health and awareness, how you respond when you get to that type. So under stress, the 3 can go to number 9, which can lead them to being very unfocused, although it could also lead them to a breakthrough in awareness in terms of being able to relate in a more global sense. In a state of security, they can move towards number 6. That leads them to be more in touch with their feelings, which can be a good thing, of course, but it can also bring up some real fear, because being in touch with feeling, of course, can be quite difficult, especially for somebody who's very outwardly focused in terms of trying to achieve success. So, how to be healthy for a number 3. Find your feelings, look for your feelings, get in touch with your feelings. Don't be too fixated on the outside world and trappings of success. Be rather than do. So the 3, being the achiever, is very much focused on achievement, on doing things, getting things done. If you want things done, get a number 3 to do them, because they will go absolutely hell for leather to get that thing done. But in order to be healthy and to come home to yourself, it means that you have to take time out to be rather than do. Go for a walk, meditate, etc., etc. Not easy for a 3 to do. Drop the facade. That's the other thing. Become aware of when you're putting on a mask in order to get a desired response from the outside world, and ask yourself, how would it be if I just let myself be myself? Do I need to put on this facade in order to be validated and achieve success? And in terms of success, you might need to relook at the definition of what success means for you. And part of the journey of being a 3 can be to learn to value empathy and connection with others at a deep level over status in the world. So then it becomes less about how the world sees you and more about how you relate to the world. That's healthiness for 3. Okay, and here we are at number 4, the individualist romantic. Now I hope you noticed the deliberate mistake. I actually had individualist performer there, which was a mistake. It's individualist romantic. Anyway, I've changed it now, and I've also altered that to a positive purple, socially conscious, connected number 3. Anyway, number 4, the artist, passionate, emotional, expressive. Most of us know number 4s. They are people who are willing to really express themselves in the way they dress, in the way they speak, very outwardly expressive. When they are at their best, when they're healthy, they are creative and they're charismatic. So we all know the kind of people I'm talking about. But when they're unhealthy, when they're unaware, they can become moralistic and self-obsessed, and that can lead to depression and anxiety. In stress, the number 4 goes to number 2, which leads them to the negative side of 2 sometimes, in seeking approval from others, expecting others to give them validation rather than finding it themselves. In security, they move towards number 1 and become more perfectionistic. That can be a good thing, because it means they can get lots of really good quality work done, but it can also lead to self-criticism, so that can be difficult. For a healthy number 4, recommendations are, get out of your expressive center and into your body. So do some kind of body-based activity, exercise, go for a run, do something that puts you in touch with your physicality. Don't get carried away with your emotions, and the way to do that is to be questioning of them. So when you have an emotional response, if it's at risk of taking you away from yourself into unhealthy areas, be prepared to question those emotions. Value what is instead of what isn't. So 4s have a tendency to look at other people and envy them, or to look at other parts of the world and think, I wish I had that, but I don't, and it isn't that terrible. So learn as a number 4 to value what you do have. And going alongside that, if you see a positive quality in someone else, recognize that you are seeing that quality because you have got the ability to recognize it, and that means you can find it in yourself. So when you see a positive quality in someone else, ask how you can embody that yourself. That's how to be healthy as a 4. Guess what? There's one more thing I want to share with you as part of this Enneagram video, and that is how the Enneagram points in the Heart Triad relate to the Tarot Constellations of the High Priestess, the Empress and the Emperor. And that also tells you why I wanted to start with the Heart Triad, because we have already in this series covered the numbers 2, 3 and 4. So you know about these constellations, so you can go back to those videos to find out more if you want to. Now, the reason I wanted to do this was, and I'm waving it around in front of the camera so you can tell, I have got this book called The Fool's Excellent Adventure, A Hero's Journey Through the Enneagram and Tarot by Susan Rhodes. And this is a very interesting book. There's a lot of information in this book, so I couldn't even begin to condense it in any sensible way into a very short video like this. So all I can do is say to you that the thesis in this book is that there is a connection between the Enneagram types and the equivalent numbered tarot constellation and the stages of the hero's journey as outlined by Joseph Campbell. Now, we're not going to talk so much about that because that's a whole different subject and a whole different video series probably. But what I do want to do is just touch on the notion that the Enneagram types could relate to the Tarot constellations. Now again, I'm quite sure there will be some Enneagram purists out there and Tarot purists out there who will be screaming and going, no, that's nonsense, it can't possibly relate. You probably realise by now that I'm not much of a purist when it comes to this kind of thing. I'm interested in exploring new connections and new ways of looking at things. However, I will say that that doesn't necessarily mean that it follows that the Enneagram types and the Tarot constellations match up exactly. And actually, in this book, Susan Rhodes does not claim that they match up exactly and that they're the same thing. They are different systems. But what she's trying to point out in this book, and does it very compellingly and convincingly, I think, is that there are relationships, and it's worth exploring those relationships. So I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here, but I think what I will do is I'll read you some of what she says about each of what she calls the paths. So number 2 is the path of intuition, and it relates to number 2 on the Enneagram and also to the constellation of the High Priestess. Number 3 is the path of creativity, relating to 3 on the Enneagram, achiever, performer, and the path of the Empress. And number 4 is path of individuation, relating to number 4 on the Enneagram, individualistic, romantic, and and path of the Emperor in terms of Tarot constellations. So, looking at the path of intuition first, what she says here is, in the Enneagram world, 2 is the type most closely associated with the High Priestess. As tender-hearted feelers, 2s naturally want to connect with others, but they often try to do so without having first connected with their own inner wisdom. I said that earlier, did I not? Due to cultural conditioning, many do not even realise that such a connection is possible. As a result, when they direct their energies outwards, doing for their families, friends and others they love, they tend to do so out of the perceived need to have their self-worth validated, as opposed to the desire to give freely without conditions. This kind of conditional giving can create the kind of codependency that is a substitute for true intimacy. The image on the High Priestess key reminds us that the feminine needs no external validation. It is complete unto itself. 2s who tap into their inner High Priestess discover the true source of their power and become the pioneers who can help resurrect the divine feminine in Western culture. And then she also talks about justice being the High Priestess at a higher octave of development. It says most 2s on the Enneagram would probably be more drawn to the magnetic mystique of the High Priestess. You know what, I'm going to stand over here. Wouldn't that be better if I stood over here? Then you could see the cards. Magnetic mystique of the High Priestess, than to the stern and sharp looking figure of justice. They don't want to develop the kind of intellectual acuity that tends to cut things apart, because they far prefer to bring things and people together. That's why justice is a shadow key for 2s. Now, I will just say that this does not necessarily relate to the same definition of shadow card and hidden card as the birth card calculation method will give you. So don't get confused. You know, in this kind of connection between the constellations and the Enneagram, what Rhodes is arguing is that these are the key cards and these relate to different elements of them. So let me go on. Yes, judgment. That represents the highest octave of the path of intuition. 2s are the type most associated with healing and the healing professions, especially as nurses and counsellors. The healing that occurs at key 20 comes to 2s at the point where they fully embrace the dictum, physician, heal thyself. Not all wounds can be healed through simple self-care, but without it, no permanent healing can occur. The 2 that learns to care for herself creates the conditions that attract the kind of healing we call miraculous, the kind associated with Lourdes or other Mary sightings. While it is a miracle, it is also the natural result of integrating the opposites. Its mysterious quality comes from the mystery that is always associated with the sacred feminine. The 2 who fully embodies that archetype is able to both heal and be healed, and all without the need to demand anything from anybody. So that's 2. Interesting, huh? So now number 3, path of creativity, and we have the Empress, the Hangman, and the World. Just making sure I put the right cards up there. In terms of the Empress, what we have here is Enneagram 3s know all about work. As industrious type A's, they fit right into modern culture. Enthusiastic, imaginative and enterprising, they are always up for a challenge. But the jobs they are asked to do often require them to sacrifice creativity for results. They usually manage to do this because, like Mother Nature, they are highly adaptable. But although they work hard, this kind of work can wear them down over time because there are limited opportunities to experience what I'm never going to be able to say this name, 𝙍𝙀𝙎𝙊𝙬𝙀. I'm going to show you the name. I know you can't see it. Hang on. Let me turn the light down a bit. I just need to show you this name because you'll understand why. Can somebody tell me how to pronounce that? I don't think it's unreasonable for me to have stumbled over that because I hadn't read that beforehand, so I had no idea that name was going to come up. Gee. Just as well I'm not a perfectionist. Otherwise I would have had to redo that entire segment of the video. Anyway, it's what that person calls flow. An inner state of joyful absorption associated with creative inspiration. I'm going to cough now because I've tied myself in knots. The experience of flow comes from making creativity a priority instead of an afterthought. Although 3s enjoy being in the flow, many work situations focus so much on results that there's very little flow, only the constant grind of new goals and deadlines. Getting away from work allows them to get a different perspective on life. That's the Empress. And then the Hangman. For a 3, the Hangman situation can seem like their worst nightmare, at least at first. Doing nothing, in this kind of suspended state, seems akin to dying. So they must cultivate patience at the beginning because it takes time to realize the benefits of stillness, the ability to experience a different kind of flow, the kind that sustains them in ways that outer activity never can. The figure on the card has obviously reached that point. That's why he looks so blissed out, despite his upside down stance. His head is encircled by the halo of illumination, because he is filled with peace. The numerical 4 formed by his legs foreshadows the principle of fourness, which is about manifestation in the physical world. It tells us that the highest form of manifestation requires a combination of outer activity and inner stillness. It also foreshadows the dancer at the world, where the upside down hanged man becomes the right side up dancer. And then at the world, it says 3s are often seen as more superficial than other Enneagram types because they often appear to be motivated by secondary gains like money, success, or social prestige. However, their focus on work and the rewards it brings is often a cover for the subconscious fear that they really have no intrinsic identity or value, hence the belief, I am what I do. Remember, I said to be a healthy 3, you need to start focusing more on being rather than doing. The cultivation of stillness gives threes access to their inner world, perhaps for the first time, and this enables them to know with conviction that not only do they have a unique identity as a soul, but they are celebrated for exactly who they are. Okay, so, and now we're going to go to Enneagram Path 4. Now, interestingly, well, you'll see in a second what's interesting. I'm going to move the Fool over there a bit, because in the Tarot Constellation, the Fool can be 22 in the Rider-Waite, so it fits into this constellation of 4, because 2 plus 2 equals 4. But Susan Rhodes proposes something a bit different, so watch for it. So, in terms of the Emperor, like the Emperor, the Enneagram 4 is strong-willed and independent-minded. Also like him, he tends to experience feelings of aridity and isolation. Pretty arid-looking place he's at there. Fours have the kind of aristocratic sensibilities and artistic tastes that often sets them apart from the crowd. At the same time, they have an innate sense that something is missing in life, something vital and life-giving. Caught between a desire to be completely independent and a longing for something missing from life, they can find it very hard to feel at home in this world. A key reason for their discomfort is that they embody that point in human evolution when the ego self has reached its developmental apex. A person at this point must grow beyond ego in order to prosper, which means allowing it to be superseded by something greater. This does not mean renouncing the ego, it only means renouncing our exclusive identification with it. But initially it's the only self we know, so renunciation is difficult. Difficult but not impossible. Looked at from another angle, Key 4 provides a symbolic depiction of what this process involves. The isolation of the desert, the isolation of the desert provides a suitable environment for change, for its isolation separates us from collective conditioning. Its harsh light strips us from our mental illusions, and its temperature extremes break down habitual responses that no longer benefit us. And then we have Death, which is the next level up with a higher octave. Death is a symbol of the first stage we pass through when moving from ego development to ego transcendence. Reflecting deeply on the nature of life and death is one of the ways that fours come to terms with the sobering truth that transformation is not a game. It's a process that once set in motion will continue to its logical end. The four has a choice to make, either to realize the limits of a self-centered life and to willingly open to whatever experiences are necessary for transformation, or to persist in a conditioned path which will make life increasingly seem like a house of mirrors from which there is no escape. Choosing to open to something new brings the welcome discovery that death is not the end of life, but the gateway to a greater reality. Now, what you could argue is that when you go up to the next octave, that greater reality is represented by the Fool, because it's going back to that totality and so on. What's very interesting about this book is that Susan Rhodes is developing a new tarot deck, which is linking the Enneagram to tarot. And one of the things she proposes is that wherever there's a constellation that has only 2 cards, like here, we've got 3 cards in these constellations, but after this number, you find that each of the constellations now has 2 cards, apart from the Fool, which sits slightly apart anyway. So she proposes new cards, and actually she has a number of new Major Arcana cards, and she has a new Trump 22, which she calls Wellspring. And there it is there. That is a draft of it. I don't think this deck is out yet, but it's coming, so it should be rather interesting. So, I'll just read you what she says about Wellspring, if I can find it. Yeah, so here it says, Wellspring, number 22, is the first of our keys to go beyond the 21 keys that we already know. Wellspring depicts the truth that transforming the world begins with transforming the individual. Enneagram 4s are the type most aware of this truth, and thus the great champions of personal authenticity and individuality. Their challenge is to learn to distinguish the willful and defiant individuality of the conditioned self from the true individuality of the original self, which is as natural as a spring that flows out of the depths of the earth. 4s are known for their ability to sense when something is missing in life. That something missing is the original self, the face before they were born. In reality, this original self never really leaves us, but it commonly becomes obscured by conditioning in early life. The path of individuation is about allowing that conditioning to be gradually stripped away so that we can connect with the original self. Wellspring, number 22, shows the nature of that reconnection, but brings not only the ability to deeply experience our inner nature, but to powerfully change the environment around us, not because of what we do, but because of what we are. So, whether it's the Fool or this new card, Wellspring, that is the path of individuation. And that is my video on the Heart Triad, the 3 types, number 2, 3 and 4, and how they relate to tarot. And I'll be back very soon. And guess what? The next video, it'll be number 5. See you soon, everyone. Bye.